everyone, welcome back to Rolling Solo. My name is Adam Smith, and if you were looking for gameplay of Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion, I've got you covered here. I'm going to give you a great example of how scenario number 1 plays out. You're going to notice something right off the hop, and that's we're not using all the mechanisms within the typical Gloomhaven rulebook in order to accomplish scenario number 1. In other words, we're not going to see certain aspects of the regular game of Gloomhaven until we progress all the way through the very first 5 scenarios of the game. Basically, how the Learn to Play guide works is it's going to take you through 5 scenarios. We're going to be going over the first one right here, but it's a perfectly streamlined way to learn Gloomhaven without overwhelming the individual in all of the rules up front. So we're going to keep a major focus on the core mechanics of the gameplay, and then every other scenario going forward after 1 is going to add things into the mix. Like we're going to start talking about looting, and of course we'll bring things back into question like the different elements, things that are not part of the original setup of the game. So for now, we're going to dive right into scenario 1, starting off with our 2 cards from the character decks, and this is considered the card selection phase of the round, and we'll be grabbing 2 cards for each of our characters, placing the 2 cards we've selected face down, and then we're going to flip the pile face up. Whichever card is on the very bottom is going to be the initiative number that matters for determining who goes first. Now, I'm playing solo, so I can strategize between the 2 different characters as to who I want to go first and choose cards appropriately. Remember, whichever card's on the bottom of my deck facing down is the one that's going to be face up when the initiatives are determined. The other thing to make mention of with scenario number 1 is that the enemy's initiative for this scenario is 50 every single time, but that is not the norm once we get through or as we move through the scenarios. And as you play through them yourself, you'll realize that eventually the actual enemy cards themselves will have an initiative number on them when things get a bit more complex in terms of their initiative triggering, which could end up being before you, after you, or tied with you. If they're tied, then the characters get to go first instead. So now we're going to go ahead. I'll choose my 2 cards for each character. We're going to obviously be aiming to try to take out this particular Vermling Raider right in front of us as quickly as possible. So I've gone ahead and I've chosen my 2 cards that I want to use for each character. Remember, you can use the top ability and the bottom ability of either card. But for the purposes of selecting the cards, you're not only thinking about that, you're also thinking about initiative and trying to go early, late, or mid-game, depending on what you want to do. Again, the enemy's initiative for this scenario is 50, so I'm trying to go early and take out that first Vermling Raider in front of me. I kind of want to get the jump on them, so I'm going to try to go early here. And I'm going to make sure that the card on the bottom of my stack, which is going to be on the top of my stack when I flip them upright, is the number I want to use, which in this case has the lowest initiative, meaning that definitely here we'll have Hatchet be going first, and then the Demolitionist will be going second. So when you actually set up your cards, say for instance I've chosen these 2, I want to ensure that the 19 is on the bottom so that when I place my cards face down like this, and then when I reveal them, the bottom one is the one that is going to become the top one, which will then tell me what my initiative is. This doesn't matter as much when you're playing solo because you already know what cards you've selected, so you can pretty much just play them face up from the get-go, which is kind of nice. If you're playing with other characters, you're not supposed to know the initiative numbers of the other characters, so the reason for them going face down is so that nobody else knows your number. You can strategize and talk in general terms about whether you're planning to go late, early, very early, mid-game, or I should say mid-round, things like that, but you can't specifically state the number initiative you're using. So for the purposes of doing this the way the game intends, I've selected my 2 cards, I've placed them both face down, and now we're going to reveal them. And there's no major surprise here because I just told you which cards I'm going to be using for initiative. So we have Hatchet going first at 18, then the Demolitionist at 19, and then the enemies that are currently on the board, which is the Vermling Raider in this case, will be going for 50. That is the order of things. So what we do next is we go over to our initiative order tokens to ensure that they're set up in the correct order. And wouldn't you know it, the way we actually set up the initiative order tokens in the setup is the exact same order that they're going in. That was just complete fluke. But in this case, we have the Vermling Raiders going last, Demolitionist is going to go second last, and then the very first character is going to be Hatchet. This is how you track who's going first. It's a great way to do it, and even in the Kickstarter version of Gloomhaven, you're just remembering the initiative numbers on your cards, but I actually find this system of remembering things much better because you can visually look, especially if you're controlling multiple characters and need to ensure that you're actually completing each one. Maybe when you're complete on each turn for each individual, you can kind of move them off to the side to say they're complete, or you can just leave them there as a point of reference. Now, something worth mentioning on the cards themselves are these blue boxes underneath the ability. Now, in the Kickstarter version of Gloomhaven, these blue boxes never existed, but for this particular campaign, in terms of learning, they do, and I really like this because if this had been there for the Kickstarter version, I think it would have cleared up a lot of confusion on some of these abilities and when you can and can't use them without having to go to the rulebook. This is huge because with this scenario number 1, we're grabbing the A cards. These are kind of the learner cards, and then later we'll be grabbing in scenario number 2 the B cards and adding them to our deck, and then eventually you're going to move to having the X cards, and then eventually the regular standard level 1 and so on. But for right now, we have these blue labels right here, which are literally going to give you text on how to actually interpret what you're seeing as an ability here. So for instance, when you see an explosive blitz card that says attack 2, range 4, and you're wondering how I can use this, it'll state one enemy within 4 hexes suffers 2 damage plus the modifier card you need to flip, disadvantage if you happen to be adjacent. You can see here it's summing up rules that you wouldn't even think of when you're actually looking at the ability, and I absolutely love that. It helps you to remind yourself that, hey, I can't be standing next to the enemy when I make a ranged attack, or I'm going to be disadvantaged. I need to make sure that I'm actually further away. Now that we've ordered the initiative as a second thing to do inside the round, the next thing we do is our character and monster turns in order based on that initiative. So we already know that right up here. We simply go to Hatchet. He is first. He'll look at his 2 cards, and it doesn't matter how I play them. Even though I put the 18 card on top, I don't have to play the 18 card first. It also doesn't matter which card I use the top of and which card I use the bottom of, so long as I do one of each. I cannot use the bottom of 2 cards, and I cannot use the top of 2 cards. So I now have to strategize, and this is why it's so important when you're picking your 2 cards to think about how each of these different strategies could be used to your advantage in a particular situation. One other thing to note inside of scenario number 1 is that you completely ignore these symbols right here on the far left hand side. They'll be talked about later on in future scenarios, but for the purposes of scenario number 1, we're only going to be focusing on the abilities inside the major square boxes of each card. I'm going to go ahead and play Second Wind for the bottom portion of the card. Again, remember, you can choose the top to play first or the bottom, however you want, but just remember, whatever you pick, you got to do the opposite on the second card. So here, move 5 hexes away, and it's move up 2. You don't have to use the full 5. So what I'm going to be doing is placing this, now that I want to use it, in my discard pile. On your character board below here, you have a lost side, which lost cards will sit here. Discard side is on the left, and active cards that have abilities that will be in play for future rounds or the given round will sit up here, or maybe even indefinitely. For this case, I'm using it for the bottom portion, so I put it in the discard pile. Discard pile means that it can eventually come back into my hand when I long rest or short rest, which you'll see later on if we happen to hit those, which we're of course going to need to at some point when we run out of cards in our hand. You short rest or long rest to get some cards back into your hand. Right now we only have 6 cards total in our hand, and that represents our health. Once all of our cards are gone, we have become exhausted. If both characters become exhausted in this case, we lose the scenario. You don't want that to happen. We'll see a lot more about how cards can become lost later on, but one thing to note is if you happen to see a symbol of a card with an X through it, once you use that particular ability, it becomes lost. And just remember, even though those abilities are typically very powerful, that card never comes back into your hand unless you have a character that has a really cool ability to pull cards from its lost deck back into play. So Hatchet can move up to 5 spaces, so I'm going to have Hatchet go from this location, and again, he can't move through an enemy unit, but he can move through his hero units, but he's just going to dance around them anyway. He's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So he used his full movement to get all the way around. Now he's going to go ahead and use the top section of his second card, which is called Close Cuts. It says attack 3. It says 1 adjacent enemy suffers 3 damage plus whatever your modifier gives you. Again, this one's going in the discard pile, so I'll place in the discard. We're going to take the modifier card from the top of the deck right here for Hatchet, flip it over and see what we get. We got ourselves a +1, so that's pretty awesome. You'll also note the number on the actual Vermling Raider is a 4, so when we head over to the stat sheet for the Vermling Raider, in the 4 position, we're going to see a total of 3 attack plus the 1 from the modification is 4 damage going on this standard or regular monster. We need 5 to kill it, so we were super close. So that's it for Hatchet's turn as of right now. 4 damage on the Vermling Raider, and the card that we pulled from the modifier deck is now discarded. We can put it off to the side. Now, I really want to finish that Vermling Raider off. I don't like that the Vermling Raider's right beside us and still alive, so let's go ahead with the Demolitionist and see if we can take it out. The Demolitionist is going to use Explosive Blitz for the bottom, move up to 4 hexes away. For my second card, I'm going to use the top section, the big one. Attack 2, range 2, target 2. So up to 2 enemies within 2 hexes suffer 2 damage, plus a separate modifier for each one, disadvantage if I happen to be adjacent to them. I'm only going to be able to actually hit the one Vermling Raider, which we've already hit once because it's within 2 of me. The Elite on the right hand side of me is 3 away, so I can't target that one. A bad time to use this card, but it is what it is. Thankfully, I'm not adjacent to this Vermling Raider, at least in terms of the Demolitionist, so my range shot is not going to be disadvantaged. If you're wondering what disadvantaged is, it just means to pull 2 cards off of the modifier deck for the Demolitionist and choose the worst of the 2. So your odds increase that you're going to have a bad result on an attack. So we know the attack is going to have 2 damage assigned to it right out of the gates. Let's see what the modifier card does in addition to that. Hopefully in addition. Oh, we got a -1. That's not what we want to see. So that's going to reduce it from a 2 down to a 1. But guess what? 1 is all we needed to take out this Vermling Raider, as we already did 4 damage to it. And the health of this thing is a 5. And you can see that by looking at the left-hand side of this level 1 Vermling Raider is gray or white, just like the standee on this particular enemy. If it happened to be an elite version, you look at the right hand side. The drop of blood icon right there lets you know how many HP it will take to take it down. You can see the standard one we're hitting right now is 5. We've already got 4. The 1 damage I just put on is enough to kill off a standard Vermling Raider. Down below, when they activate later on in the round, they're going to have a movement of 1 or up to 1, and they're also going to have an attack here of 2. The Vermling Raider has now been removed from the game, as well as all the damage on the monster stat card. Now, in this scenario, loot doesn't drop because, again, in the first scenario of this campaign, we're learning the very basics of the game. In scenario number 2, loot will begin dropping for everything that you kill. So if you're a veteran of Gloomhaven and have played the campaign inside the Kickstarter version, which is, again, a completely different campaign than this one, which is the predecessor or the prequel to Gloomhaven, then you'll know that there's other mechanisms within this gameplay video you're seeing right now that aren't present. Don't think that this Jaws of the Lion game is streamlined to the point of not having those mechanisms. Think of it more like they've done a much better job of streamlining the learning process of Gloomhaven through the first 5 scenarios by adding things in as you go. So once you get to the end of that 5th scenario, you are going to have a full understanding of how the game operates without being overwhelmed by all the rules up front. So, as I mentioned, in a normal case, once you understand all the rules, loot would drop in this case, but for scenario number 1 and its learning purposes, you don't. With Hatchet's turn done and the Demolitionist done, we now move to the Vermling Raiders, who are going to activate. Another gameplay mechanic that's not introduced in scenario number 1 is the monster ability cards. Now, normally when you would go ahead and activate an enemy, you would actually flip over one of these monster ability cards, but in this scenario number 1, we're not using them. Instead, we're actually just looking at the monster stat card in order to determine how much movement and what kind of attack these raiders are doing. Now, we know they'll move once, and it doesn't matter which type they are, they'll move once. They also do 2 damage no matter the type. I can tell you very much so that later on in future scenarios, there will be major differences between the standard attacks and movement and the elite units. They will be a lot tougher. This, again, is introductory and learning, so things are a little evened out and nicer. The only thing in terms of difference between the elites and the normal Vermling Raiders is that it takes 10 HP to take down an elite, so a lot more damage needs to be applied. Now, how do we determine which one goes first? The first first thing you always do is take a look at the type. Elites, if they're on the board, are going to activate first before regular monsters. So we only have one elite, that's the one. If we happen to have two elites on the board, it'd be whichever number is the first one. So in other words, if it was a 1 and a 3 on the board, the 1 would go first. Then you'd do the 3, and then you'd move into the standard monsters. When it gets to the standard monsters, the same logic applies with the numerical values. The 1 will go first in this case, as we have a 1 in the top right hand corner, and then the 6 down below next to the elite will go. The elite Vermling monster is now going to go ahead and move, and it's just going to move once. Now let's say hypothetically we were on a future turn and this exactly was the setup and the elite needed to move at this point. Well, what would the elite do? The elite would actually move to become adjacent to one of the characters on the board, the closest one first. That's the one he's attracted to the most. If there's a tie, in other words, if he was to move to here, there'd be a tie between which of the two he's going to attack. Because in this scenario, they're only attacking with melee combat. There's no ranged on these Vermling Raiders. So they need to be adjacent in order to make their attack. That's why when I moved from here to here in this turn, no attack will be made from the elite because it can't reach us. So I'm talking hypothetically about a future turn where the Vermling moves to here and then wants to make an attack. If he had to choose which of the two characters he's going to hit, it's not completely random. It actually comes down to the initiative order. Whoever went first in the initiative order is the target. So there is definitely some strategy in playing your cards to sometimes not be first in order to avoid being the target of oncoming attacks, if you have to be close enough to know that you're going to be hit by them. So in this particular case, he'd be going after Hatchet. But as we know, we started here, we moved 1, no melee attack to be made because no one is adjacent to this creature, so that is the end of the elite's turn. Next up, we look at the standard or regular monsters. The number 1 way up in the top right hand corner really only has one option. He cannot move into an obstacle because the obstacle blocks his path, so he needs to walk along it. So he's going to head down this way. Obviously, in every case of movement, they're always trying to take the shortest path to their monster focus. If they're that far away, they're really just trying to get close to whoever is the closest to them. So in this case, the Demolitionist is the focus of that monster and it's moving 1 towards it. Again, it can't attack anything, so that's the end of that one. Now we move to the final Vermling Raider down here. Same thing as the elite, going to try to move closer to the group of 2, but can't make any attacks. This is as far as it goes. We now move to the end of round, and in scenario number 1, the thing to be aware of is you're looking for any arrow icons on the cards that are rotating in a circle on the modifier decks. So you'll be looking on your character's modifier deck to see if there is one, there isn't, or one over here, there is not, or if you happen to pull a modifier card from a monster attack above, check that as well. If you do see one, that means at this point in time at the end of the round, you shuffle your modifier cards all back together. The other thing you can do at the end of the round, however, in scenario number 1, it specifically states for you to burn through all the cards in your hand first, and by round 3, if you have 6 cards and you're using 2 at a time, you're eventually going to get to a spot where you don't have any cards in your hand, and you'll be forced to, in the end of round phase, which we're currently in right now, to actually go ahead and short rest. And if you short rest, you essentially shuffle your pile without looking. You take 1 card out and you throw it in your lost pile. You'll never get that card back. 5 cards would come back into your hand. If you don't like the card that was lost when you short rest, you can take 1 damage to randomly draw another, but at that point you're stuck with whatever result you get. In scenario number 1, it forces you to use all 6 cards in the first 3 rounds without short resting in those 3 rounds. But in future scenarios of Gloomhaven, it opens up and you can short rest whenever you choose to in any end of round phase. Remember though, every time you do, you're just burning cards into the lost pile. So you really want to do this when it strategically makes sense to get more cards in your hand. All right, I've gone ahead and chosen my cards for the upcoming turn. These are going to be my initiative cards for both. Just ignore this one right here. This one is underneath and it's on my discard side of my Demolitionist. These are the 2 cards I'm actually using here, a 20 and an 88. Again, 20 for initiative. Here I've got a 24 for initiative, 64 underneath. I think this is going to be a nice combo to do some interesting damage here. So knowing that the Demolitionist is going first with a 20, Hatchets with a 24, and the enemy's standard across the board for this scenario are 50, then the Demolitionist gets to actually slot up to the first initiative position and will be going first in this upcoming round. First card I'm going to use for the Demolitionist is Knock Out the Support. I'm going to use it for the bottom portion, which looks really cool. It says gain advantage on all of your attacks until the end of your next turn. So what do? I can move up to 2 first, and I'm actually just going to move 1. I don't have to use the full 2, but I want to be adjacent to an obstacle, this obstacle right here, which actually spans 2 hexes. The next thing says, destroy one adjacent obstacle. If you do, perform strength condition on yourself. So I gain an advantage on all my attacks until the end of my next turn. So I just went right in there, blew up those obstacles. They're no longer considered something that can't be moved through. I can actually move through them as normal hexes now, which is another really cool feature of this character. And at the same time, I gained strength from doing so, which is really the major reason that I did that. So I simply went ahead and found a strength condition token and placed it in my conditions area on my character board. For my second card, I'm going to play Implode. It's an attack 3 and allows for muddle, which is awesome. One adjacent enemy suffers 3 damage plus the modifier and gains disadvantage on all its attacks until the end of its next turn, which is huge for me. This will stop the elite from coming back at me with some vicious attacks and give me a better chance of surviving, or at least not getting hit as badly. I told you earlier what disadvantage does in terms of taking 2 cards off the modifier deck and taking the worst one, but guess what? Because my condition is strength, I get advantage, which means I take 2 cards off the deck and I pick the best one. So here we go. Let's see what happens. I already have an attack 3. We got a +2, that's huge. Now, again, the obvious target of this attack, being that it's a melee attack, is the elite. I should have made that clear, but I couldn't have hit this one anyway. Next up, we got a -1. So because of that strength being on my character, I did a total of 5 damage to elite, which is half its health. That was a big time hit. So I've placed a 3 token, 1 and 1 for a total of 5 damage on the 3 position because it's an elite 3. And also I'm going to place a muddle condition on this character, which is going to mess up its chances of getting a good attack on me. Hatchet is going to start things off on his turn. Double throw is what he's playing. On the very bottom it states add +1 attack to all your attacks this turn. I'm going to go after, from range, the elite. I've got a +1 on my attack, and I'm going to do an attack. As you see at the very top of this second card, center mass is an attack 3, range 3, and this elite is 3 range away. Just so you can understand though, this Hatchet character could attack this elite character or even this character here. The fact that the elite's standing in front of it doesn't block anything. As long as I can draw a line from one of the corners of the hexes to a corner hex on a target, as long as there's no obstacle or anything breaking line of sight, it's a valid attack. However, I want to go after the elite on purpose anyway because of how well the Demolitionist did in doing 5 damage to that Vermling Elite Raider. So we're going to go after it with a 3 attack. This one right here, +1, makes it a 4. And if I get lucky on my modifier pull, then we might have what we need. Let's see. Oh no, so we actually end up reducing the 4 down to a 3, so it'll have a total of 8 damage on it. It needs 10 to be killed off. So that elite Vermling Raider now has 8 damage on it, so close to taking it out, but guess who gets to activate right now? That's right, the Elite Raider gets to go first, and the Elite Raider is going to focus his attack as it can attack things adjacent to it. The Demolitionist is the target or focus of this attack, so there's no need for this Vermling Raider to move, even though he has an allowance of 1 to move. He's already beside a target. He's good to go. So he's going to make a 2 attack against that target. Flip over the modifier deck. The one thing to make note of, though, is that he is muddled. There's a condition on the Vermling Raider Elite, which means he is disadvantaged. So he's going to pull 2 cards from the attack modifier deck and take the worst of the 2. Let's see what happens. First one off the top is a +1, so now he's got a 3 attack coming against the Demolitionist, which is not good. Next one up is a 0. That's better. I'll take the 0. So obviously I'm going to take the worst of the 2, and that's how disadvantage works. And it is only a 2 attack coming at the Demolitionist. So inside of scenario number 1, how you deal with damage is you take it off your HP. So I have 8, I will drop down to 6. Just so you're aware, later on in the scenarios, they will open up the idea behind removing a card, or losing a card I should say, from your hand in order to deal with all the damage you receive. This becomes a really interesting strategic choice between balancing how many cards you have left to try to not have exhaustion happen, because remember, if all the cards disappear from your hand into the lost pile and you can't play 2 cards at the beginning of a turn, you are exhausted. Also, if your HP ever reaches 0, you're also exhausted, so you're balancing both options there. But for scenario number 1, you're just going ahead and taking your HP off the dial, so we'll drop drop this from an 8 down to a 6. For those interested in what the right-hand side of the dial is for, this is for experience, and the icon is right here. You don't have to worry about this until later on when cards begin to present themselves in your deck that have that icon with a number inside, and then every time you use those cards or actually do that ability, you're going to gain some XP, and you'll track it on this right-hand side. That'll help your character to level up over time. So just like that, we've ticked down to 6 HP. Next up, we look at the regular monsters. The number 1 will activate first. This one's just trying to get closer to its focus, which is the Demolitionist, being that it's the closest character can go after. So it's moving on its way, can't make an attack. Moving to the 6. You know what's really interesting? When the Demolitionist came here and destroyed the obstacle, he made those 2 hexes passable. In other words, creatures and characters can move through that space now, which means the enemies can make use of it, and this enemy certainly will. So if this had have still been an obstacle, this green bordered area, the enemy would have actually gone around this way trying to get closer to me. But because I destroyed it, he's going to walk right on top of it and make a 2 attack. So now we're going to flip over a modifier. This one is not muddled, however. This character here is free of the whole muddle condition situation. So just 1 card off the top is a 0. So it will just be a clean 2 again coming at the Demolitionist. And it's a pretty bad day for the Demolitionist, at least within this turn. He has been hit twice and gone from 8 HP down to 4. We're now done another round, and as of right now, we have no shuffling that needs to be done, so we can move straight into picking our 2 cards. Now, one other thing that I want to correct that I missed is that conditions like muddle, which is a negative condition, once the character that was affected with it goes through its full turn, that condition then drops off. So if you remember, I placed a muddle onto the elite, and when the elite went ahead and made its attack and drew 2 cards and took the worst of the 2 just moments ago, that is the end of its turn once it makes its attack, and at that point, the muddle condition is removed from the elite. It no longer is muddled, so any future attacks it makes would be a normal pull from the modifier deck. So choosing cards is pretty straightforward. We only have 2 left going into this 3rd round here. So I have a 35 for Hatchet and a 42 for the Demolitionist. So Hatchet will go at the very top of the initiative order now, and the Demolitionist will go 2nd. So we'll be rotating those tokens around back to the way they originally were in round 1. And again, because the Vermling Raiders are 50, my characters get to go first. Ha! Hatchet starts it off, bottom of the card for this particular turn, because I want to use this stopping power ability. Immobilize is not going to trigger this time because it would trigger right now, target 1 adjacent enemy. I don't have any adjacent enemies around me, so unfortunate for that. But I do get to move 3, and that's always good. So let's go ahead and do some movement here. Now I'm trying to put myself in a position where I can deal with multiple enemies because, again, I'm a ranged character that can do ranged attacks, so I don't want to be kind of on one side of the board and not the other. I want to get close enough to both. But I also want to be in range enough to do my next attack, and I need to be within 3 range to make a targeted attack here. So I'm going to try to make this work in multiple ways. So this should be pretty cool, actually. So with Hatchet here, if I go 1, 2, and I put myself 3 right here, what gets really interesting is where I'm currently sitting, which again may look like I'm sitting on an obstacle, but I'm actually sitting on a destroyed obstacle, so I'm allowed to move in there. What really is interesting next is I have a card called Disorienting Barrage. This barrage that's going to disorientate everything on the board is awesome. It's an attack 1, range 3, target 3 different individuals, which is huge, and then on top of it, it allows me to muddle all of them. So that's awesome. The only downside is I will get disadvantage when attacking this one because of the fact I'm adjacent. You might have thought, well, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you put yourself somewhere else? The reason I put myself there is because I need to be able to draw a line of sight from the corner of my hex to the corner of this hex to be able to hit this target because it's 3 away and I can do it. If I had to put myself here, this obstacle would have completely blocked me and I couldn't have actually made the shot. So I'm happy to be right there. We'll go ahead and make an attack first against the elite because I can choose which of my targets I want to go after, and I'm attacking all 3 in the end, which is crazy. So first off, we'll go for the elite and see if we get enough to take it out. So here we go. We got 1 going into it. I'm hoping for a +1. Oh, that's even better. That's a full-on kill. So that's 3 going against the elite, and the elite is gone. So the elite has been wiped right off of the board. That was a huge hit. The next one is going to be disadvantaged. So I'll be drawing 2 cards and taking the worst of it. It's a 1 attack on this thing, so let's go ahead and draw. a 0. Okay, I'm all right with that. No negatives. There we go. So I don't get the benefit of the positive. I can take the 0 because that's the worst of the two, which is still decent for me. It's still 1 hit against this standard monster, and it has 5 HP. So 1 damage will be going on the 6th position of the monster stat sheet. Plus, we also don't want to forget that we're muddling all the characters that we hit. And of course, we don't have to muddle the elite because the elite no longer exists. And now I'm going to make the last attack at this individual over here. It's an actual legit attack, not being disadvantaged that way. So just 1 card off the top. Oh, the null. And you can see we actually got the shuffle symbol. So at the end of this round, we're going to have to shuffle our entire deck back. And the null is the worst thing you can get because it means the entire attack is a miss. Now, this is something that's easily mistaken in the rules, and that is when you get one of those null cards, yes, your attack is considered a miss, but any conditions that would have associated themselves with the attack in conjunction with it still apply. So the muddle condition actually still applies to this character, although you can tell based on its distance away from me, it's probably not going to mean so much when his turn comes around because it can't attack me anywhere close by. And something else worth noting was when I got the strength condition quite a while ago, I made use of it the one time on the Demolitionist's next turn or attack, but then after that turn, that condition should have disappeared. I haven't used it since, but you're going to want to keep an eye on those condition tokens because it's very easy to miss them, as I just did. For the Demolitionist's turn, I'm going to go ahead and do a Piston Punch, and it's an attack 3 at the top. I'm going to be targeting the number 6 Vermling Raider, so I'm going into this with a 3 already. Pretty good result. And let's go ahead and draw from the correct pile. I don't want to grab from the monster modifier pile. Oh, that's not what I want to see. So that's a -1, meaning it's only going to get through for 2. Now, just so you're aware, currently on that creature, there is a 1. So now it's bumped up to a total of 3. So I'm 2 away from taking it out. But I'm not done yet. I still have the bottom of another card, so I'm going to use 1-2 punch. And on the bottom, it just says attack 1. So I just need to get a +1. So here's hoping that pans out for me. Oh, even better. That's exactly what I needed. 2 times 1 is 2. That's exactly what I wanted. Plus, there is a shuffle symbol here. So actually, both of my characters will be shuffling at the end of this round. But this character, or I should say, Vermling Raider, has been knocked out. That was a great round. We wiped out most of the board. The only one left now is to activate the Vermling Raider way up there. And again, this one's just going to come closer to us as it's trying to make an attack against us. It's now done its turn. The muddle condition that was put on it is now removed. That is the end of another round. So because of the shuffle conditions on both the modifier decks, I'm going to be shuffling all the decks together. The only one that doesn't get shuffled so far is the monster one because we haven't seen that icon come up yet. Modifier decks are all shuffled up, and the next thing we need to learn is about short resting. And how short resting works is, well, in these cases where you get to the end of 3 rounds and you have used all the cards in your hand for this particular scenario's example anyway, and we need to have cards in our hand to play for the upcoming round, so we choose to short rest. When you short rest, you simply take all the cards from your discard, and just so you're aware in terms of the timing of this, you don't have to wait until your entire hand is in the discard to do a short rest. So long as you have 2 cards sitting in the discard pile, you can do a short rest. So this is also a way to get a card that's in your discard pile back into your hand really quickly if you're trying to make short work of something and have a particular card you need to maybe pull off a combo. So there's part of a strategy there too, but remember, you are burning a card away, and I'll show you why that is in a second. So we grab up all of our discard pile like I am right now, flip them over and give them a shuffle so we have absolutely no idea which one is which. And then what we're going to do is we're going to draw one at random. So out of my deck of my 6 cards, I should say, we'll pull this one here and flip it over. This card is now in the lost pile. You'll see it's an initiative 18. There's a heal, there's a move. We might look at that card and say, oh my, I really want to keep that because my character, let's say, has 2 health and I need the only heal card that I have. So what I'm going to do in order to keep that card, you can then go ahead and expend 1 HP off your dial on the red side in order to draw another card. But whatever card you pull that second time, you have to lose. But if you're happy with the first result, you can just leave it be. So in this case, I'll leave this be, and the rest of these cards, the other 5, come back up into my hand. So I did the exact same thing with the Demolitionist because I need cards in my hand, so we're short resting. Go ahead, draw one of these at random. And we lose it. This is not lost sides on the other side over here. So we lose the explosive blitz card. Actually, we lost 2 of the highest initiative cards, which I think were the first 2 cards that we actually played. So that's kind of ironic. And we're going to go ahead now, and I did shuffle these, and we're going to go ahead now and take the rest into our hand here. All right, so I pretty much got this one in the bag here. Again, these are tutorial scenarios moving through the campaign, and so they're not expected to be super tough, especially the first one. And as you move through them, they'll get progressively more interesting. And I can guarantee you that the strategy is very, very deep here in terms of the cards you use, when you use them, and how you short rest, how you long rest, things like that you'll learn later on, especially long resting, which is another way to bring cards back into your hand with a little more control over what you lose. But going into the next round in terms of selection of cards, I got 2 right here, 35 for Hatchet, and 2 cards here for the Demolitionist, and a 20. So the Demolitionist will regain first position on the initiative order, and we'll go ahead and just change that up. I really do like this, and I really actually want to see something like this for the larger versions of Gloomhaven, because it is nice to just have this sitting here to do a quick look to see who's up first. And we have the Demolitionist, so we might as well go ahead with the very first thing I want to do. And honestly, the first thing I want to do is do a move 3. So we're going to go ahead and have the Demolitionist go 1, 2, 3 to be right beside that particular character. Throw this in the discard. Next up, we're going to go ahead and make an attack 3 on the top. I'm going for big time hits here. This is a knock out the support. So we'll go ahead and see if we can pull this off. 3. What does it turn into? Oh, just a 2. Okay, well, I'm glad I'm coming at this with 2 characters because I'm going to need all the help I can get. This is the number 1 Vermling Raider, so I'll put 2 damage on the number 1 slot. This card goes in the discard, and this is over with. Now, these 2 are in the correct... Yes, these are in the discard pile. We're good there. Okay, moving over to here, we have 2 cards. What am I going to do? Well, I want to make a nice ranged attack. So I'm going to use this bottom one here, +1 to attack, +1s to all attacks during this turn. And then I'm going to do a range 3 attack from here to here. So I'm going in with a 4, which is pretty aggressive. Oh, that is cruel. That is really, really cruel. I thought I had that one in the bag, but the game decided not so much. This is what I'm saying. You can plan and have all this stuff ready to go, and you're like, yep, this is it. I got the scenario in the bag. That null card will get you. There's only one of these in your deck, but man, does that thing ever show up at the worst times. So that is an example of how that card can ruin your dreams. So there you go. That is a miss. But again, I have no conditions with this, so there's no benefit of a condition still applying. So that's as much as that's going to be. So those 2 cards are done. Now we move on to the Vermling Raider, who is still alive. This thing doesn't want to go down without a fight. It's already adjacent to my Demolitionist, which is really bad because he only has 4 health left. He's going to make an attack of 2. We're going to flip a card over and see what else happens. -1, thank goodness. So it's only going to be 1 damage hit against the Demolitionist. Poor thing has seen better days, down to 3 HP. That's another round in the books, but you can see we've got a shuffle icon here, so I need to shuffle this deck. Deck is all shuffled up. I've chosen my next 2 cards, and it looks like Hatchet's going to be going first. So we'll go ahead and change up the order again. Just like that. All right, so Hatchet, what are you going to do in this turn? Well, Hatchet, I'm going to go ahead and probably just do a straight up attack right away. This one's an attack 3, range 3, so let's go ahead and see if I can finish this thing off from distance again. -1, it just doesn't want to die. It doesn't want to die. It only has 2 HP. It just took a 2 hit and it's still standing. And this card is actually pretty awesome. It says move 2, move up to 2 hexes away, and then all adjacent enemies just suffer a straight damage. So guess what? There's no blocking that. 1, 2, I'm adjacent to this thing. It takes the additional damage right now, and we've wiped out all the enemies. So after being successful at the Roadside ambush scenario number 1, we go to the conclusion, which states, you wipe the blood of the last vermling from your face, and your thoughts return to the sleeping lion. Surely they've got a stew ready by now. It would be so perfectly warm and soothing, and it's right through that gate. So close you can already taste it. But then another thought comes. It is highly unusual, brazen really, for a pack of vermlings to operate this close to the city. Could they be behind the string of disappearances? It's a long shot, but one worth investigating, especially considering this ambush site doesn't look like their base of operations. There is probably a nest nearby that with any luck will have more information on the missing blacksmith. and treasure. Treasure would be nice. So we can also see down here at the very bottom, we've got rewards. It states a new location, a hole in the wall, which is B, location B, is going to go into B1. So B1 is actually where the roadside ambush took place, but this next sticker, number 2, a hole in the wall, is literally going to sit right there on the edge of the city, and you can see an example of that sticker right here. And that is it. Once scenario number 1 is complete, you'll go ahead and read the congratulations section about the rewards, learn about your character sheets in terms of how to mark what you've accomplished, learn about card upgrades and saving, and then you're going to move on to scenario number 2. Remember, every single time a new scenario comes up through these first 5 scenarios, new mechanics are going to be introduced. For those veterans of Gloomhaven in prior games, those mechanisms that you didn't see as part of this playthrough are going to start popping up in those other scenarios. Again, I really like the learning experience that's going on here and the hand holding that's happening through these first 5 scenarios to get everyone on the same page with how to play Gloomhaven without a giant rulebook to consume at the beginning. I love this play and learn mentality. So this is a big kudos to them for changing it up with this retail release. But that is going to do it for scenario number 1. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, keep on rolling solo.